Welcome to part 2 of Harassment and Discrimination, what everyone needs to know. We just finished talking about the employee side. And so just to give you a little recap, employees need to know their company policies and use the complaint procedure to make reasonable, good faith complaints when issues arise. If ever there's a question on whether to make a formal complaint or work out the issue in some other way, we would encourage you to talk it out with a leader or an HR rep within your company, or if you use Helpside, you're of course welcome to call us too. So let's switch gears because employers, this is where things get real. You are responsible for decisions made by your leaders and managers that impact your employees. And so making sure they're well-trained is key. I think most of the time when we promote a hire a manager, it's because they're knowledgeable about the work that needs to be done and they can task train their employees. Like they're really good. And so they get promoted, which is wonderful. Like we love to see promotions from within. But let's also make sure these new managers are given the training and resources they need to develop into good leaders and reduce risk to the company. Bottom line, they need to be well-versed in the basics of employment law if they're going to be trusted with making employment decisions. And I'm not just talking about hiring and firing. I'm talking also about all aspects of performance management and, what to do with information such as I'm pregnant, or I hurt my arm playing pickleball this weekend and now I can't use it, or I'm unhappy with my pay. Why is Joe making more than me? Or I can't come in because I have another migraine. Or maybe it's even something like I need to take time off every Wednesday morning to attend temple for my religion. I think these are really tricky things that Amanda and I have seen tons of times, and knowing how to respond to issues like that can be very overwhelming. Managers need two things. First, training and resources. Second, they need to know when to reach out and involve others before making decisions that are going to impact the company.
Right. So let's talk about what employers need to know, because to be honest, mistakes can be costly. Consequences can be very high.
Yeah, I think sometimes, I don't know if you've seen this, Amanda, but a company will treat the topic of harassment and discrimination like a checkbox. Like, okay, great. We all watched this training and I think we're done here and we can move on. Doesn't really work well that way.
No, definitely not. We watch videos, we have the harassment training. They're important, but they're not enough. Leaders have to know what the organization needs. They need to be aware of what's going on in their teams, what to look for. That's the only way that they're actually going to be able to take care of these problems. So a good thing to remember is that while a company can technically be compliant with all the laws, they might still have a terrible workplace culture. And the goal is always to have a healthy and productive workplace culture.
Yeah, I love that. I've seen that many times. And I think it always starts with good leadership and good policies that are well communicated and modeled, both, right? Depending on the size of an organization and the way that people interact, meaning are we remote? Are we all together in the office? How much interaction do we have with the larger team? A manager can often feel like the whole company to an employee. And I think companies need to take great care in choosing leaders that can represent the values and mission of the organization so that you don't end up with pockets of culture that are just tanking, right? We have to be united in the mission and in what the company stands for. And I think building that into your leaders so that it trickles down is really important. Leadership is a position of real trust. And managers are front line, and they're in the best place or best position to identify potential risk and escalate people issues and enforce policy.
100%. I think our first piece of advice to a company is to choose very carefully. Make sure they have the resources they need to lead well and reduce risk to the company. Training should absolutely include employee management and the basics of employment law. You want to make sure that they know those basics so that they can lead their team. You want to also make sure that you have HR experts in the company or work with a company like Helpside so that when they do have questions, they know who to turn to. So let's talk about policies versus reality. As Rachelle mentioned a little while ago, good policy is key, especially for companies who have 15 or more employees. Most of the time we see companies buy a basic standard policy guide that just, doesn't normally do it for the company. They buy it from a law firm, download it off the internet, they have employees sign it, and then it gets checked off the list, which is great, except that the policy is then forgotten about, not really referenced or discussed, and it just sits there and collects dust. It doesn't do its job. Your policy guide should be a living document. As laws change, your policy should be updated. Think about whether situations have come up that your policy doesn't address, or maybe doesn't address as well as it should. You need to update it. As you hire employees in different states, definitely update your policy. And when situations arise, reference the policy. Use it to make sure that you're leading your teams well.
Awesome. Yeah. I think sometimes, I've even seen situations arise and then you're looking at your policy going, wow, we didn't really think about this, or we didn't anticipate it. And when that happens again, having it as a living document means that you're in that habit of going in and adjusting and changing and then rolling that out and talking to your employees about it. So the EEOC recommends having a robust policy, especially related to harassment and discrimination. And then they also recommend communicating key policies often. So thinking that through, I think it feels like, or could feel like, just one more thing that we have to do. Companies that have been successful at doing this, I've seen do it during onboarding, taking just a couple minutes with that employee, saying, hey, I know that you received your policy here, just a few key ones that we want to point out, make sure that you're aware of, and of course, encourage you to read the guide on your own. Another time that makes sense to do it is during one-on-ones. So when managers have their one-on-ones, taking just a little bit of time to ask if the employee has any questions on certain policies, or see if they can, talk them through key ones that are, of particular risk of being violated within the company. Talking those through, making sure employees don't have any questions, I think can be really helpful. And then finally, company meetings. If you guys have like maybe a monthly company-wide meeting, taking a second to just review one policy at a time and doing something of a rotation can make all the difference. I think when you do that, it reminds the employees that the company values and enforces policies. And I think employees are far more likely to report concerns if they know the company has rules and will actually take violations seriously.
For sure. I think another great tip from the EEOC is that employers should have a well-documented complaint system and make sure it's communicated to their employees. This can be during the onboarding, like Rachelle was talking about. It can also be during their annual harassment and discrimination training. We just recommend that you have this, posted, communicated, highlighted at company meetings even. You can take a little bit and just talk about that little policy during a company meeting. That way, no one can claim that they didn't know who to talk to or didn't know what the way of resolving a concern was.
Yeah, I think that's really key, that employees just have that at their fingertips at all time, and they can't say that. And I think being proactive will advance a healthy company culture much faster than when we kind of sit back and just wait until something comes up. The ultimate goal is to build a happy and productive workspace where employees are engaged and aligned with company goals. And leaders should be fostering a solid professional relationship with their employees and work toward creating a safe and comfortable workspace where employees do feel comfortable coming and talking directly to them. The complaint process, though, or the complaint policy should be multi-level, right? Because sometimes maybe the issue is the leader and the employee's like, well, what am I supposed to do if the problem is my actual supervisor? Obviously, we don't want that. We want our employees to feel comfortable. But I think it's important as a leader to be like, hey, I understand, like, if I'm the problem, this is who you can talk to. I just want to make sure that you feel comfortable as an employee and that you feel like you have someone that you can talk to if there is an issue. And we should be encouraging that.
Absolutely. Employers really should be inviting employees to work with them when anything is or might impact the employee's ability to work. If the employee doesn't feel like they can go to the manager, they need to go to the next step up. They need to know who up that chain they can go to. Open communication gives companies the best chance at resolving issues early. before they fester into something big and, potentially problematic for the company.
Right. I think it's important too for leaders not to avoid having difficult conversations with employees. It's human nature to want to avoid conflict, and sometimes conversations can be really uncomfortable. But if you have an employee, let's say, who's not performing well or not following the attendance policy, or maybe missing too much work, it's time now to have a documented conversation. We would suggest bringing that employee in first, find out what's going on, right? Let's make sure we understand before we start just, expressing what the problem is. So find out what's going on, talk about the performance gap, and then after, send a recap email indicating, hey, thanks so much for being receptive to feedback, if they were. And here is what we expect and what we need going forward, right? So we don't even have to make it extremely formal, and we can still document it and get to the bottom of what's going on in those conversations, even casual, but we always want to make sure that we document it. Now, in the course of that conversation, if you find out that an employee is dealing with medical issues, maybe it's a mental issue, a physical issue, or maybe it's pregnancy, or they're having trouble with other employees and they're feeling targeted, or they're saying, I don't feel comfortable in the workplace, things that could touch on harassment and discrimination or put them quickly into a protected class, like disability or pregnancy, we've got to slow down. In situations like that, we want to just gather information. That doesn't mean that we pepper them with crazy questions, but hey, help me understand what's going on. That's an okay thing to ask. Or how do you think this might impact your work? What do you need from us? What do you think we can do to help? Right? So just gather information. We're not making promises, but we're at least getting an understanding of what's going on. And then you would say something like, hey, let me get back to you on, what we can do. And just maybe give me a day or so, and we'll talk again. That way you can then talk to your HR expert. You can talk to leadership within the company. You can put more heads together and decide what to do before making any set decisions.
I love that. I think a key takeaway from what you just said is to document performance issues now. Don't wait till later. Even if it's a minor issue, you want to make sure that you document that. Write it down. Even if it's just a follow-up email after you guys talk. Write that follow-up email. Make sure you put all the details in there so that you have that documented. If something then comes up later on, you can go back and you can say, okay, we were looking at this from the very beginning. You never know when an employee might disclose a medical condition due to pregnancy. They might bring a harassment or discrimination case against you. They might even whistleblow to an outside organization. You want to make sure that you have everything documented ahead of time so that if they bring that, you already know what's going on, and they can't use that discrimination to say, well, I didn't actually have poor performance issues. You can say these poor performance issues were happening beforehand, and then you found out about the discrimination later. We always want to make sure that we're taking care of it. We don't want to look like we're retaliating. So we need to document everything. Please do not procrastinate documenting. Want to have it done.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, you never know what tomorrow will bring. And so if there's something you need to address with your employee, do it now. The thing I love about those follow-up emails is that they're time and date stamped, and you send it to the employee and it shows that they actually received that information. So much better than just like writing notes. Hey, I had a verbal conversation with so-and-so today. We can't actually prove that the other individual or that employee received that information. So often we see simple situations that become complex overnight. So let's touch on just a couple more things companies really need to get right. First, investigations matter. When an employee brings a complaint or you see something going on that might be a risk, investigate. If your company doesn't have anyone qualified to do that internally, meaning somebody who can be objective in the situation, I think working with a company like Helpside is vital. The good news, though, is not all investigations are really difficult. Some of them are very quick, but it's still important to act quickly and stay neutral, document everything. And let's say you don't trust the person complaining. I think that happens often. Um, Keep an open mind and let the facts lead. I always like to encourage managers and companies to get as much information as you can. There's no reason, in fact, it's to your detriment to shut a person down when they're complaining. Make them feel comfortable. Tell them, help them understand that you're going to take this very seriously. Take all the information in that you can. Ask for evidence. All of those things. Because you never know, even if it's somebody that you don't trust or that you think might be blowing something up for an ulterior motive. At the end of the day, everybody's responsible for their own actions and reactions. And so let's say the complainant is responsible for certain things. They need to be held accountable. Let's say the person they're accusing is responsible for certain things. They also need to be held accountable. And so there's no harm in listening and finding out as much information as you can.
Right. So let's say that we have someone bring a complaint, but there's no evidence, there's no witnesses, no history or pattern of other similar complaints, and we end up in a he said, she said situation.
Yeah, that's really tricky, isn't it? It happens quite a bit.
Yeah. I think, like you said, it is a tricky situation. For the most part, we go back to what Rachelle was saying a minute ago. We want to make sure that it's handled with documented coaching, where we go over expectations that everyone can agree to, whether the incident happened or it didn't happen. So we want to go back to the handbook, go back to the harassment and discrimination policies. And we look at that and say, okay, this is what is expected of the company. This is what's expected of employees and of the employers. And then once we go over that, then we keep our eyes and ears open for patterns. Are we seeing complaints about the same person? Does the complainant keep bringing issues up that have no credibility? And then most importantly, we make sure to involve HR and leadership before making any employment decisions.
Thanks, Amanda. I think to sum this up, managers and leaders make or break this. They are the front line, and unfortunately, sometimes the weakest link. And it's not because they don't care, but because they're not well trained. And when left without resources, managers will each do their own thing. And this inevitably leads to major inconsistencies in how people are treated within the organization. And that, of course, increases risk. When rules apply differently to different people, people notice. They see that is unfair. It causes them to scrutinize and look carefully. And then sometimes they then attribute those decisions to things that a person can't control, like protected classes. And that's where we start to get into hot water. Having good policy and applying it consistently builds trust. And I think trust is so important in the health of any organization.
100%. Thank you, Rachelle. One last thing I want to add is leadership accountability. And let's say this part out loud. High performers don't get a free pass, or at least they really shouldn't. Protecting toxic high performers is one of the fastest ways to damage your workplace culture. Remember, good culture comes from the top down. Employees want to see integrity, like Rachelle was talking about. You want to see that integrity. You want to build that trust. And so be a good leader. Choose good leaders who do not exempt themselves from the rules, and make sure that everybody, employers and employees, are following the policies.
So just a few final thoughts to wrap this up. If you're an employee, pay attention to what you're experiencing. You don't have to minimize it. And if you're an employer, this is more than just about risk. It's about the kind of workplace that you're creating, because people remember how they're treated.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Rachelle. We hope this episode gave you practical insight and a clearer understanding of how these issues show up in today's workplace and what can be done to address them. If you're sitting there thinking, we might need to revisit some of the things that our company does, you're probably right. Good news is that's literally what we do. If you like this episode, share it with your manager or coworker, or that one person who might really need it. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Lexi, that was not great. That was not the greatest. Okay, I don't know. If you find out that's not really going to be edited well, we could probably do it again. Doesn't take too much time now that we're all prepared for it. So
Yeah.
okay.